Your patient just walked into the exam room with 47 printed pages from Google, a TikTok diagnosis, and zero intention of following any treatment plan that you come up with. Here's the hard truth. This isn't a compliance problem. It's a trust problem. And the system is broken long before you ever met that patient. The trust gap between patients and providers has never been wider, especially in this field of chronic complex illness. Patients are spending 4 or more hours a day researching online, convinced that they know better than even the doctor. And providers, well, they're burning out from constant questioning and misinformation fatigue. And this is a real tragedy. Both sides are suffering because no one is addressing the actual problem: misdirected energy in a broken system. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand exactly why your patients Google obsessively instead of trusting you, and more importantly, what you can do about it. And this isn't about, shaming patients or defending doctors. This is about rebuilding the partnerships that actually get people better. If you're a patient watching this, I know you're terrified. I know you may have felt dismissed. I know that you're trying to take control of something that feels completely out of control. And I'm gonna show you why your current research strategy is sabotaging your actual recovery and what to do instead. I'm gonna give you the tools to rebuild that trust without burning out. I train Lyme literate providers who treat some of the most complex chronic illness cases in all of medicine. These are patients who have seen 15 or more doctors, spent thousands upon thousands on alternative treatments. When patients are obsessively researching, it's not because they don't respect medicine, it's because the system has failed them so many times that self-education has become a survival mechanism. But survival mode and healing mode, they're not the same thing. So what's the real reason that patients can't stop Googling? And why would your patients spend more time on Reddit than following your protocol? According to a study in JMIR Mental Health, health anxiety communities on Reddit show patterns of reassurance-seeking spirals, where patients search for answers but become more and more anxious with each and every search. The average user reported spending 3 to 4 hours daily researching their symptoms with no improvements in their health outcomes. Think about that. When patients arrive at your door with these chronic complex illnesses, they've often been dismissed, misdiagnosed, and told it's all in your head for years. And this research habit they have, it's an adaptive trauma response. Here's how it happens. Let's take a Lyme patient. They see their primary care doctor. They've got fatigue and brain fog, joint pain, muscle pain. But then they get told it's depression. In fact, I know exactly what that feels like because it is exactly what happened to me. Maybe they see a rheumatologist and the tests come back normal. They go see the infectious disease who says, hey, chronic Lyme doesn't exist. And by the time they find a Lyme literate provider, they've learned that trusting blindly gets them nowhere. So what do? They start Googling. And research shows that this Googling behavior creates a paradox. The more patients research, the more anxious they become. And the more anxious they become, the more they research. So this is a self-perpetuating cycle that masquerades as empowerment, but it actually sucks away the energy from what really matters: adherence to the treatment protocol and focus on healing. What this means for patients? Well, your research isn't making you smarter about your condition. It's actually making you more confused and more scared. You are spending hours trying to become an expert in something that takes doctors years and even decades to master. And you're doing it with none of the clinical context or objectivity that makes this information useful. What does this mean for providers? Well, when you dismiss the behavior as non-compliance or difficult patient syndrome, you miss an opportunity to redirect this energy productively. That research drive, that's motivation. That's someone who desperately wants to get better. So your job isn't to shut that down, it's rather to channel it. Because here's what happens when you understand the real root cause. You stop taking the questioning personally, and you start seeing it for what it is. It's a coping mechanism that needs redirection, not rejection. So why is Googling without clinical context actually dangerous? I mean, you wouldn't really perform your own surgery after watching a bunch of YouTube videos, would you? So why do you think that you can diagnose complex chronic illness this way? In a 2021 study from the Journal of Medical Internet Research, they found that 72% of patients who self-diagnose using online symptom checkers actually reached incorrect conclusions. More concerning, 64% of those patients delayed seeing a healthcare provider because they believed they had already identified their actual problem. So I mean, let's let that sink in for a moment. Nearly 3/4 of all these patients were wrong. And 2/3 actually delayed getting appropriate medical care because they thought they'd figured it out when they actually hadn't. Here's what patients don't understand about medical training. It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about pattern recognition built over thousands of patient encounters. It's about knowing what red flags to take seriously and which symptoms are just noise. It's about clinical reasoning that just cannot be learned by reading articles. When you Google fatigue, joint pain, and brain fog, you're gonna find something like 47 different possible diagnoses. Lyme disease, lupus, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, mold toxicity, mast cell activation syndrome, heavy metal poisoning, thyroid dysfunction, adrenal dysfunction, and the list goes on and on. So how do you know which one it is? I mean, you don't, because you're missing the context. You know, one of the things so interesting is in my Lyme disease practitioner certification and mentorship program, this is exactly the clinical reasoning I work through with other providers. People who have the medical background, 5, 10, 20, even 30 years of experience. And they actually are asking the same questions that most of my patients are. Here's a laundry list of possibilities. Where do I start? In fact, this morning, I was actually responding to a post on this exact topic. And we were working through clinical reasoning, and someone replied and said, well, how do I choose the top 1, 2, or 3 things to focus on when I think there's this many things going on? The other thing is diagnosis and treatment is not always a straight line. It's not always do step 1 and then you'll move to step 2 and you'll go to step 3. We need to know all the possibilities, but then we have to start somewhere and sort it out in a strategic, objective manner. So if I'm playing a chess match, I know all of the moves. But what I need to do is figure out who I'm playing against and how they're playing today. So I make a move, then I sit back and I reassess. Because what happens is if we don't, you spend months, years, or longer not getting the right diagnosis. You end up seeing practitioners who are either charlatans or they're the conventional sort of dogma toeing the line and telling you it's on your head. You may have spent $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 on unnecessary specialty testing. Then you come to my office or one of our LDPC trained providers' offices and say, hey, I've already wasted all my money on this. But it turns out that this misdiagnosis through self-diagnosis or going to see someone who doesn't take the time to see the big picture and then strategically and systematically sort it out, right? Symptom overlap is real. But when we don't have the clinical context, we don't have the training, we often come to the incorrect conclusion. Google, all this AI that's out there, it all gives you data. Clinical experience and appropriate training with mentorship is what gives you wisdom. There's a huge difference, right? And the dangerous part, when patients lock in the self-diagnosis, they often ignore symptoms that don't fit their narrative and they overemphasize symptoms that do. This is called confirmation bias, and it actually delays diagnosis by months and even years. I've seen patients waste entire years chasing the wrong diagnosis because they decided that they had something before they even walked into the doctor's appointment. And then the provider becomes an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to work with. And that's where treatment fails before it's even begun. So I want to dive into the hidden costs of this trust gap and why it's destroying good doctors. I mean, honestly, your doctor didn't go to medical school for a decade just to defend themselves against TikTok all day, every day. And here's what happens when they have to. According to a 2022 survey that was published in Mayo Clinic Proceedings, 63% of physicians reported feeling diminished professional satisfaction due to their patients constantly challenging their clinical judgment with internet research. And 47% of them said that this contributed to burnout and early retirement consideration. Nearly half considering leaving medicine early because defending their expertise became more exhausting than practicing it. So let me tell you what I hear from the practitioners that I train. Some of them say things like, I spend more time explaining why TikTok or Instagram is wrong than I actually do treating patients. Or, I'm so tired of constantly defending my clinical decisions to people with no medical background. And others tell me, I want to help, but I can't fight misinformation and disease at the same time. This is the part that so many patients don't see. Your provider isn't annoyed because you care. They're frustrated because the constant questioning erodes their ability to do their job effectively. Medical decisions, they require decisive action. And when every single recommendation is met with, but I read this or that, treatment gets delayed. The real scenario, a Lyme provider prescribes a combination antibiotic protocol. Patient comes back and they say, hey, I read this protocol causes gut damage. So I'm only taking one antibiotic and I added these 5 supplements that I found on Amazon instead. So the provider has, 2 basic choices. 1, spend 30 minutes re-explaining pharmacology and risk management, or let the patient do ineffective treatment and fail. And the reality is, either way, everyone loses. Good providers want informed patients. They want you to ask questions. But there's a difference between, can you help me understand why you chose this treatment? And I don't think you're right, because this Facebook group said something else. One is partnership. The other, opposition. And the tragedy is that the providers who care the most, the ones who are willing to treat the most complex cases, the ones who are willing to think outside the box, to take on the most difficult and often most dismissed patients, are the ones who are burning out the fastest when the trust is constantly questioned. They're not leaving because they don't care. They're leaving because caring is too costly. So if you're a provider watching this and thinking, I need better tools to handle these complex chronic illness cases confidently, that's exactly what I do. I train functional, integrative primary care providers to become the community's trusted Lyme and chronic vector-borne illness experts through evidence-based protocols and real-world mentorship. And we focus on how to have these difficult conversations from the beginning so that we can build trust and partnership with our patients so that we can bring back the joy of providing this care to patients. If you're interested, you can learn more at www.lymetraining.org. So how do practitioners rebuild trust without burning out? Well, first, we have to acknowledge that trust is broken. Don't defend the system. Don't make excuses for other doctors who may have dismissed your patient before you. Say something like, I understand you've been let down quite a bit before. I'm not going to do that. Here's exactly how we can work together. And that one statement does more to rebuild trust than any credential that might be on your wall. Second, invite questions, but set boundaries around how they're asked. Say something like, I want you to bring your questions to our appointments. Write them down. We'll go through them together. But then I need you to trust that if I recommend something, it's because I have the clinical reasoning that you can't see from that article. This creates structure without shutting down engagement. Third, explain your clinical reasoning out loud. Patients often fill uncertainty with anxiety. When you walk through why you're choosing treatment A over treatment B, you're teaching them how your expertise works, and that builds trust. I'm a big proponent of assessing, making a diagnosis, a treatment protocol, and then reassessing at regular intervals all along the way. Assess and reassess all the time. And let your patient know that you're going to do that. We have enough to work on for today. Those things will come up in the future, and I'm going to be here to listen. But I also want you to trust the process. And this transparency eliminates the need for this extra detective work. And then 4, give them productive homework. You might say something like, instead of researching all these treatments, I want you to track these 3 symptoms every day. That data is going to help me adjust your protocol faster than any article that you find. You're redirecting that research energy into data collection, and that actually helps you treat them better. And fifth, normalize the process. You could say something along the lines of, hey, complex illness doesn't follow a straight line. Some weeks you're going to feel worse before you feel better. That doesn't mean the treatment is wrong. It means that your body's responding. So let's define what progress actually looks like so that you're not Googling every symptom that might kind of spike along the way. And I tell people all the time, healing's not a straight line. It could be very curvy and circuitous, but in the end, I have a starting point and we have a goal end point. And our goal is to keep that goal in mind, and we'll eventually get there. When you normalize that messy middle, patients are gonna stop panicking and start trusting the process. And the reality is this: you can't control what patients do outside of your office, but you can create an environment where trust is rebuilt through transparency, education, and partnership. And that's where treatment success really starts. Not a perfect protocol, but in the relationship that makes patients willing to follow your protocol. So for patients, what's that exact strategy that you can apply to channel your health anxiety into something that actually helps? Well, step one, recognize when you're researching from fear versus curiosity. So if you're Googling at 2 a.m. in a panic spiral, that's not research, that's anxiety. Use that as a signal to close your laptop. Write down the fear you have and bring it to your provider. Let them know what you're going through. Step two, prepare for appointments strategically. Instead of printing out those 47 articles, write down your top 3 symptoms that concern you the most. Come with questions about your current treatment. Tell us what's working and tell us what seems like it isn't working. This is going to give your provider actionable information rather than defensive reactions, right? So then step 3, redirect that research energy into treatment adherence. Set phone reminders for medications and supplements. Even use those reminders to give yourself a 10 or 15 minute awareness break in the middle of the day. De-stressing oasis in the middle of your day. Meal prep for your protocol. Create systems that make following through easier than falling off track. Now, step 4, find one trusted source and stop comparison shopping. If you have a Lyme literate provider that you trust, stop looking for second opinions on Facebook. And in fact, stop looking to other providers. Recently, I started working with a parent who is searching for answers for their autistic teen who also happens to have mold, Lyme, and Bartonella. The challenge is their medical situation is very dire at the moment, but they've been going to doctor after doctor after doctor. And I was speaking with them and I said, this other doctor's got a great protocol. Go back to their clinic and just follow it. When I reached out to that provider to say, hey, I saw this person in consultation and I recommended they come back to your clinic, they said, look, I've already told them about 5 different times, no more doctor shopping. It's interfering and becoming dangerous in your son's healthcare. What did they do? They said, I'm politely bowing out. This doctor stood up because they knew that the doctor shopping was getting in the way. Find one trusted source, stop shopping, and start focusing. Commit to that protocol and give it time to work. Put effort into following through on the protocol and measuring the results. Then step 5, if you feel like you need to join a support community, I'm all for it, but join an emotional support community, not a bitch session community, and certainly not a medical advice community. Reddit and Facebook groups can be helpful for feeling less alone, but they're not helpful for diagnosing co-infections or changing your treatment plan. And all this internet searching, the God's honest truth is most of the people out there are talking bullshit. So work with someone who can say, hey, guess what? I treat people with chronic Lyme disease who actually get better and go back to living their lives. They stay well for decades at a time and longer, right? A doctor who's been sick with chronic illness, Lyme disease, babesiosis, heavy metal toxicity, who was sick for 12 plus years, but is now over 13 years symptom-free. Work with people who actually have results, not people who talk about why you're not getting results by not following their plan. Because you know what? They're not better either. And this is a big shift from I need to figure it out on my own to I need to execute what my trusted provider recommends. And that's where healing happens. Not in the discovery of the perfect protocol, in the execution of a good one. And one last bit there. Doctor shopping, practitioner shopping, and even adding and removing from the protocol because you think you know because you read somebody else's, AKA combining 16 different protocols, it never works. One protocol followed precisely is going to work more than all this other bullshit that you're doing. So let's recap before we're done here. Patients aren't Googling because they're difficult. They're doing it because their trust is broken before they may even meet a really good provider. That research energy, it's not the problem. It's misdirected use of that energy that is. And providers, they're not frustrated because they're arrogant, but they're burning out continuously all day long fighting misinformation. It's totally exhausting. And the solution isn't patients stopping all of their research, and it's not about providers lowering their standards. It's about both sides recognizing that healing requires partnership, and partnership requires trust, transparency, and focused energy. Energy that's focused on what actually works, adherence, communication, and your provider's clinical reasoning. If you're a provider who's dealing with the specific challenge of Lyme disease, other environmentally acquired co-infections, where patient trust issues are even more intense because of medical gaslighting and diagnostic complexity, there's another layer to this. In my next video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly why Lyme patients are the most challenging to treat from a trust perspective, and the exact framework that I teach providers to turn true skepticism into collaboration. You're not going to want to miss that one, so do yourself a favor and hit those bell notifications, subscribe to the channel, so you'll be notified immediately when that video drops. If you're a provider, this is the missing piece, and you're not going to want to miss it. And if you're a patient, this is going to change how you show up for your appointments. So stop Googling, start healing, and I'll see you in the next one.